The room was too big for the problem they were solving. That was the first thing Dale Owens noticed when he walked in. The chamber inside the galactic compact central station was built to hold 300 delegates. It had high ceilings of pale stone, long curved benches, and lighting that was soft and blue and designed apparently to make everyone feel calm. It was not working, not today. Owens found his seat in the back row, third from the end, the Earth section. It was the same spot he had sat in for the last 9 years, so far to the left of the main floor that the main screen was a slight angle away from comfortable. He had stopped adjusting his neck for it years ago. He just lived with it now. Around him, delegates from 41 species were doing what they always did in this room, talking, filing papers, whispering to the small translation units clipped behind their ears or along their jaw lines, or in the case of the Sorrow Collective's representative, threaded through 3 of its 9 fingers. The compact ran on talk, it ran on process and procedure, and motions filed in triplicate, and it had been doing this successfully for 600 years, which was, Owens had to admit, genuinely impressive. He sat down, set his coffee on the small tray built into the armrest, and looked at the screen. The screen showed the Dominion Throne's ultimatum in full. It had been delivered 4 days ago by a Verith courier ship that dropped out of fold space directly over the compact central station, broadcast the message on every open frequency, and left without waiting for a response. That was very Verith. They did not wait for responses. Responses implied the other side had a say in the matter, and the Verith did not believe in other sides having a say in anything. The ultimatum was simple: 17 compact member worlds, all of them in the KTH corridor, all of them sitting on the fold lanes the Verith wanted would surrender their orbital stations within 30 days. Any world that did not comply would be pacified. The Verith used that word the way other species used the word cleaned. It meant something was going to be made very still and very quiet, and it was not going to be clean at all. The delegate from the Porathi Union was speaking now. He was tall, blue-gray, and deeply upset. He had been speaking for 20 minutes and showed no signs of stopping. Owens understood about 60% of what he was saying without the translation feed, which he considered a personal achievement given that the Porathi language had 4 different grammatical modes for expressing fear, and the delegate appeared to be using all of them. The basic argument, as near as Owens could follow it, was this: the compact had to respond. The Verith had crossed a line. No one could be safe if the compact simply gave ground every time the Dominion pushed. Every delegate in the room agreed with this. The problem was the next part, because responding to the Verith required ships, and when the compact's military assessment office ran the numbers quietly 3 days ago, and then slightly less quietly when the results came back, what they found was that the combined fleet of all 41 member species, positioned optimally, supplied correctly, and commanded without a single mistake, had roughly a 40% chance of holding the KTH corridor against a full Dominion push. 40%. The delegate from the Sorrow Collective, a wide, flat creature that communicated through color shifts along its upper membrane, had turned a shade of deep orange when that number was read out. Orange, Owens had learned, was the collective's equivalent of a long exhale. He understood the feeling. The assessment office had gone down the member species list one by one. The Parathi Union strong fleet well supplied, but their ships were built for border patrol, not fleet engagement. The marine sovereignty, excellent long range weapons, poor fold drive reliability. The foul confederation, good crews. Aging ships, not enough of either, and so on down through 39 more entries. Each one slightly more discouraging than the last. Earth's entry was near the bottom. It always was. The compact ordered member species alphabetically in its working documents, and Earth came late in the sequence by galactic convention. The assessment read in its entirety: one prototype vessel, non-combat. Classification, decommissioned status. Pending. Estimated combat contribution. Negligible. The delegate 2 rows ahead of Owens from the Marine Sovereignty actually laughed when the Earth entry was read aloud, not a cruel laugh. The kind of laugh that comes when something confirms what you already knew. Footnote laugh. Owens drank his coffee. On the main floor, the debate had moved into its second phase. The first phase had been grief. The second phase was negotiation. What could be offered? What could be conceded? What could be traded to the Verith in exchange for pulling the ultimatum back? The compact had done this before, not with the Verith, but with other powers, other demands. Sometimes it worked. It bought time. At least it bought the slow, grinding kind of peace that felt more like waiting than living. But it kept the stations intact and the people on them alive. The vote was called at hour 4:41. Species, each one casting a position. Owens watched the tally screen on the far wall as the numbers came in favor of opening diplomatic negotiation with the Dominion throne. 39 opposed 1. KTH remnant, an old species with a long memory and a very small fleet, voted no. The chamber noted it and moved on. Abstained 1. The screen showed Earth's marker in the abstain column, a small blue square sitting alone, perfectly still. No one asked about it. No one turned to look at the Earth section. The meeting moved forward into procedural steps. Who would lead the negotiation? What timeline was acceptable? How communications with the Verith would be structured? Important things that would take weeks and produce very detailed documents. Owens finished his coffee. He sat through the rest of the session with his hands folded on the armrest and his eyes on the main screen, and his mind somewhere else entirely. He was doing arithmetic. He had been doing it off and on for about 3 years, but he was doing it more carefully now, with real numbers rather than estimates, because the assessment office had handed him real numbers today, and they lined up with what he already thought. The corridor outside the chamber was long and white and mostly empty by the time the session closed. Owens walked it slowly. His footsteps were quiet on the pale floor. At the far end, past the water feature that the compact's architects had apparently felt was necessary, he stopped and pulled out his comm unit. He found the contact he wanted. Calvin Pewitt answered on the second tone. He was in the engine bay. From the sound of it, he was always in the engine bay. How'd it go? Pewitt asked. Owens looked back at the chamber doors. Already closed, already sealed behind 41 species, making plans that had a 40% chance of working. Light her up, Cal, he said. A pause, not surprise. Calvin Pewitt had not been surprised by anything in 15 years. About time, Pewitt said. The line closed. Owens put the comm back in his pocket and started walking toward the docking bay where his shuttle was. Waiting. He did not hurry, he never hurried. He had 11 years of work sitting dark and cold in the outer belts of the Karth system, and it had been patient. This long it could wait another few hours. The UES ironclad was not pretty. That was the first thing anyone said when they saw it, and it was always true. It sat in the outer belt of the KTH system like something a shipyard had started building and then thought better of. Its hull was dark gray, uneven in places, patched in others with sections that didn't quite match the sections beside them because they had been added at different times by different hands with different ideas about what the ship needed to become. It was longer than it looked from a distance, and it always looked longer than you expected. When you got close, from the outside, it looked like exactly what the compact's registry said. It was a prototype, an old one, a ship that had been sitting in the dark for a decade, burning through its maintenance budget and not much else. From the inside, it was something else entirely. Calvin Pewitt walked Nora Vance through the engine deck the way, and walked someone through a house he built himself, slowly touching things as he went, pointing out details that no blueprint would show because no blueprint had ever been filed for them. Pewitt was a big man, wide in the shoulders, with hands that looked like they had been involved in a long argument with heavy machinery and had mostly won. He was 51 years old and had been on this ship for 11 of those years, and he loved it the way some men love old trucks, irrationally, completely. This, he said, stopping at a housing unit the size of a small room, is what I told the compact's inspector was the secondary cooling array. Nora Vance looked at it. She was 29, sharpied from Phoenix, and she had been the ship's tactical officer for 3 years. She knew enough about engines to know this was not a cooling array. What is it? Actually, she asked. The full drives. Precision calibration core, Pewitt said. Built it myself. Took 4 years. Nora stared at it. 4 years, she repeated. The first 2 years I was just figuring out if it was possible. Pewitt said pleasantly. Years 3 and 4 I was building it. Year 4 and a half I broke it by accident and had to start year 4 over again. And what does it do? Pewitt smiled. It was a slow smile, the kind that came with a very good answer attached to it. It lets us drop out of fold space inside a target formation, he said, not outside it. Inside, within 400 m of wherever we want to be. Nora was quiet for a moment. That's not supposed to be possible, she said. The compact's assessment office said it was theoretically possible, but practically absurd. Pewitt agreed. I put that on a card and kept it on my desk. Very motivating. They kept walking. Engine deck gave way to the weapons corridor, and the weapons corridor was where the inspector's report and the reality of the ship parted ways so completely that they were no longer in the same conversation. The compact's registry listed the ironclad as carrying 2 short-range point defense systems and 1 survey-grade energy emitter. Standard non-combat configuration. What the corridor actually held took Nora 4 minutes to walk past. She didn't ask Pewitt to explain all of it. She was a tactical officer. She could read a weapon system by looking at its housing and its power feed configuration. She read these ones the same way, one by one, as she walked. By the time they reached the far end, she had stopped asking questions. She was just doing math in her head, the same way Owens had Been doing math in the compact chamber. 4 days ago, and she was arriving at the same kinds of answers. How long has Owens known, she asked, what the ship actually is? Pewitt thought about it. He's known what I was building since year 2. He's known it was done since about 8 months ago, and he waited. Pewitt confirmed. He wanted the right moment. Nora nodded slowly. She looked back down the corridor at the weapon system sitting dark and silent in their housings, waiting the way the ship had been waiting. This, she said, is going to be a very bad day for someone. Yes, Pewitt said, but not us. On the bridge, Dara Simmons had been awake for 19 hours. She was 23, the youngest person on the ship by 4 years, and she sat at the communications and linguistic station with 4 different audio feeds running through her earpiece simultaneously, and a translation display open on her left screen that was updating faster than most people could read. She had a gift for language the way some people have a gift for music. She didn't just hear words, she heard the shape of them, the weight, the emotion buried underneath the grammar. Right now she was listening to the Vareth. The Dominion fleet was moving. She had picked up their formation. Communication 6 hours ago, tight bend. Transmissions encoded in a rotating cipher. The Vareth changed every 72 hours. She had cracked the current cipher in 40 minutes, which was not something she planned to put in her official report because she was not entirely sure it was legal, and she was fairly sure no one had done it before. What the communication said was simple. The Dominion Armada was assembling at the edge of the KTH corridor. 217 warships, moving slowly, deliberately, the way something moves when it knows nothing is going to stop it. She flagged the count and sent it to the main bridge display. Then she sat back and listened to the Vareth talk to each other because she found them genuinely interesting in a way she suspected made her unusual. Vareth hive mind communicated in a language that had almost no words for uncertainty. It had 17 different grammatical structures for expressing certainty, each one with a slightly different shade of meaning, but no real equivalent for maybe or possibly or we are not sure. They were not built for doubt, they were built for knowing and for moving and for winning, and for 400 years those 3 things had been enough. She wondered what doubt would sound like in their language if they ever needed it. She was still thinking about this when Owens came onto the bridge, set his coffee down, and looked at the main display for a long time without speaking. 217, he said finally. 217, Dara confirmed. He nodded once, the way he always nodded, like the information was fitting into a space he had already made for it. That evening, the full crew of 63 people ate together in the main bay. This was not a rule, no one had ordered it. It had just happened, the way things happen on a ship that has been sitting dark and quiet for a long time and is no longer going to be sitting dark and quiet. The food was terrible, it was always terrible. The ironclad supplies were whatever Earth Command had been able to root out to a ship that officially was not doing anything important, which meant reconstituted protein and shelf-stable vegetables and coffee that tasted like it had been made from a description of coffee rather than actual coffee beans. Nobody complained, they had been eating it for years. They ate and they talked, not about what was coming, not directly but around it. The way people talk around a thing they have been preparing for long enough that They no longer need to say it out loud. They told old stories. They argued about nothing. Pewitt described for perhaps the 14th time the day he broke the calibration core by dropping a wrench into it. And everyone laughed in the same places they always laughed, because it was still funny and because the laughter felt good in the chest. Dra ate her food and listened to all of it and thought about the Varith armada moving slowly through the dark, certain of everything. Owen sat at the far end of the table, quiet, drinking his terrible coffee, watching his crew the way he always watched them, with the careful attention of a man who knows exactly what he has. When the meal was done, he stood. He did not make a speech. He said, "Early start tomorrow." That was all. Everyone understood. They cleaned up and they went to their stations, and the ironclad sat in the dark of the outer belt, holding very still, waiting for morning in a place where there was no morning, only the slow count toward when the fold jump took 11 seconds. For 11 seconds the ironclad was nowhere. It was in the space between places, in the dark fold between one point and another. And then it was somewhere very specific. Inside the Dominion armada, not at the edge of it, not approaching it, inside it, in the center of its forward formation, 400 meters from the nearest Varith warship, a heavy carrier, long and silver and vast, with weapons arrays along its spine like vertebrae. Nora Vance had the tactical display live. Before the fold completed, she had run this moment in simulation 63 times. She had the targeting sequence ready, the firing order memorized, the fallback vectors calculated to the second decimal. She had done all of this so many times that her hands moved without her telling them to. "We're in," Pewitt said from engineering. His voice was steady. He sounded like a man confirming a coffee order. Owens looked at the display. 217 red markers all around them, close enough that on an optical feed you could see hall markings. He said, "Begin." Nora began. The first 3 minutes were not like anything the Varith had a word for. The hive mind processed threat data collectively, which meant that when the ironclad fired its first salvo, every Varith ship in the formation felt it at the same time, understood it at the same time, and attempted to respond at the same time. This was usually their greatest strength. A single mind in 217 bodies was faster than any divided command structure, faster than any human officer chain, faster than anything they had ever fought. It was not faster than already being inside their formation. When the shooting started, the carrier to port took the first hit at its drive section, not a killing blow but a deep one. It pushed the ship sideways into the vessel beside it, and the collision knocked both of them out of position. The Varith formation, built for long range engagement, was designed for ships attacking from outside. Ships attacking from the inside did not fit the formation doctrine at all. 2 ships trying to angle their weapons at the ironclad found themselves pointing at 3 other Varith vessels. The hive mind recalculated. The ironclad moved. Pewitt had built the full drive for precision entry. He had also quietly, and without mentioning it in any report, made other improvements to the ship's speed and turning that he described in the engine logs as minor thrust optimizations. They were not minor. The ironclad moved through the Varith formation the way fast thing moves through a slow crowd, not randomly, but along a line that Nora had calculated, a path that kept the largest ships between the ironclad and any clean firing solution. On the bridge, Dar was still pulling Varith. Communications. They were coming faster now, the cipher burning through rotations every few minutes as the fleet command tried to lock humans out of their channels. She broke each new cipher in less time than the last one. She had a theory that panic made the Varitha's cipher selection worse. She kept the theory to herself for now. They're trying to open a gap in the formation, she told Owens. Northwest quadrant, they want to pull ships back and create a clean firing line. Owens looked at the display. Nora. He said, already on it. Nora said, 3 more ships in the northwest quadrant found the morning very complicated. In the 31st minute, the first Varith ship broke formation and ran. It was not a tactical retreat. It was not a planned withdrawal. It was a single ship, a midweight destroyer, its shields failing, its communications burned out, that simply turned and went in a straight line away from the engagement as fast as its drive would push it. The hive mind could not stop it. The ship's crew was still connected, still part of the collective. But whatever signal the collective was sending was not reaching through the noise of failing systems and whole damage. The body was running even if the mind was still there. Dra saw it happen. She watched it on the tactical display and felt something strange, not triumph, just the particular sadness of watching a thing break. 2 more ships followed. In the next 4 minutes, then 12, then the northwest quadrant came apart entirely. The Varith fleet, in 400 years of war, had never done a full emergency dispersal. The maneuver existed in their doctrine only as a theoretical, a last option for a fleet that had been destroyed enough that holding formation was no longer possible. The hive mind had never activated it in a real engagement because they had never been in an engagement that required it. It activated it now. 217 ships, what remained of them, began to scatter, not retreat to a defensive line. Scatter in all directions, maximum speed, putting distance between themselves and the center of the formation as fast as physics would allow. They were trying to get far enough away to use their long-range weapons without burning their own ships. In the crossfire, Owens watched the red markers on the display bloom outward, like a flower opening in very fast time. They're running, Nora said. There was something in her voice that was not quite surprise and not quite satisfaction. Something that sat in between. Follow, Owens said. The ironclad moved. The second phase of the engagement lasted 47 minutes. It was quieter than the first. Not in terms of weapons fire, there was plenty of that, but in terms of the noise on the bridge, the first 3 minutes had been fast, tight, every second a decision. This phase was different. The Varith ships were dispersed now, and the ironclad moved between them at a pace that was almost methodical. Owens drank his coffee, cold by now. He stood at the main display and watched Nora work, and he offered corrections twice, once on an approach vector, once on a power allocation call she had made that he thought was slightly conservative. She took both corrections without arguing, which meant she agreed with them, which was how he had always been able to tell she was actually listening. Pewett's voice came through the ship channel every few minutes with updates. Drive systems were holding, weapons were at 92%. Hull integrity was fine. The ironclad had taken 2 hits in the opening phase. Glancing shots more surprised than damage and had not been touched since. At the 74th minute, the last major Varith warship in the corridor went dark, not destroyed, dark, drifting, its power systems shut down or dead, moving slowly away from the engagement zone. A long, sad arc, silence on the bridge. Not long, just a moment. Dar pulled one last signal from the Varith channels before the fleet's communication network collapsed entirely. A single transmission, very short, sent from what had been the Armada's command ship to somewhere deep inside Dominion space. She translated it in real time. Her voice was quiet. "They're reporting," she said, "reporting back home." Owens looked at her. "What are they saying, Dra?" "Read the translation off her screen." "They're describing what happened," she said. "They're saying one human ship entered their formation undetected. They're saying they have no record of this vessel's weapon classification." She paused. "They're saying they are requesting guidance because their doctrine does not have a response category for what just occurred." The bridge was quiet again. Nora at the tactical station was looking at her display, not at the tactical data, just looking at it. After a long moment, she said, "We should log a damage report. We barely have any damage," Pewitt said over the channel. "I know," Nora said. "Log it anyway," Owen said, his empty coffee cup on the armrest of his command chair. He looked at the display one more time. The red markers of the Dominion Armada, scattered and broken, bleeding off in a dozen different directions into the dark. He thought about the chamber in the compact station, the high ceilings, the soft blue light, the footnote laugh. He thought about the small blue square in the abstain column, sitting alone, perfectly still. "Send our position to Earth Command," he said. "Standard format." Dra opened the channel. The ironclad sat in the corridor that 217 ships had come to take, and the corridor was quiet now. And the stars outside the viewport were the same stars they had always been. The compact's emergency session was called 6 hours after the first Varith distress signal reached the central station. By then there were 49 distress signals. They came in fragments, broken by damaged transmitters and long distances, and the station's communications team had been piecing them together for most of the night, laying them side by side on a long display that ran the full length of the monitoring room. The picture that came together from the pieces was not a clear one. It was confusing in a specific way, not confused because the information was missing, but confused because the information was present and the people reading it could not make it fit into any shape they recognized. The emergency session convened in the same large chamber as before. Same pale stone, same curved benches, same soft blue light. Every delegate was there, even the ones who usually sent junior staff to sessions they considered low priority had come themselves. The Sorrow Collective's representative had shifted into a gray so deep it was almost black. At the front of the chamber, the compact's military assessment office presented what they had. It took a long time, not because there was so much information, but because the information kept requiring explanation, and the explanations kept producing more questions, and the questions led back to the same central fact that everyone in the room was already staring at and not quite accepting. The Dominion Armada, all 217 ships, had been engaged and broken by a single vessel in 74 minutes. The Vessel was registered in the compact's fleet database. It was Earth's prototype, the non-combat auxiliary, the one with the decommission notice attached to its file. The room was very quiet when the assessment officer finished his report, not the quiet of calm, the quiet of a large number of very intelligent creatures trying to recalibrate everything they thought they understood about something all at the same time and finding it difficult. The delegate from the Porithi Union spoke. First, he asked the assessment officer to confirm the number. 217, he said. You are saying one ship against 217. The assessment officer confirmed it. The delegate sat back. The delegate from the Marin Sovereignty asked about the weapon systems. What systems? What classification? The assessment officer said the compact's registry listed the ironclad as carrying 2-point defense units and 1 survey grade emitter. The Marin delegate asked what the ship had actually used in the engagement. The assessment officer said they were still analyzing the signals data, but what they had so far did not match any compact classified weapon profile. The Marin delegate asked what those weapon systems had come from. The assessment officer said he did not know. Admiral Lou Greer joined the session by transmission. He was in Earth Command's main operations station, sitting at a plain table in a plain room, a cup of coffee in front of him that looked like it had been sitting there long enough to go cold. He was 60 years old, broad-faced, gray-haired, with the particular stillness of a man who had spent decades in rooms where people were waiting for him to say something. He did not say much. The compact's council chair asked him to explain the ironclad's capabilities. Greer said that Commander Owens and Chief Engineer Pewitt would be better suited to answer technical questions about the ship. The council chair asked why Earth had not disclosed the ship's actual capabilities during the threat assessment 4 days ago. Greer picked up his coffee, considered it, and set it back down. Earth disclosed everything the compact asked about, he said. No one asked about the ironclad. Silence. The council chair said that the ironclad's registry listing as a non-combat auxiliary was clearly inaccurate. The compact classified it. Greer said, 14 years ago when Earth joined as a probationary member, we submitted the ship for review. The review board assessed it as non-combat auxiliary. We didn't change the classification. We just kept working on it. The delegate from the Sorrow Collective changed color. The gray shifted briefly towards something that was almost gold. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then the Verith ambassador, who had been sitting at the edge of the observer section in complete stillness since the session began, spoke for the first time. She was tall the way the Verith were always tall, and she had 8 limbs and a face that human neurology never quite finished processing. She had been watching the session with the flat attention of someone who is absorbing information rather than reacting to it. She spoke in her own language. The translation came through on a 4-second delay. Which world, she said, authorized this vessel to act? Greer looked at the camera on his end. Earth Command authorized it, he said. Commander Owens executed. She was quiet. Then she said, in the Verith language, a phrase that Dar Simmons, 6 systems away, listening to the delayed feed on the ironclad, would spend the next hour with. The phrase did not translate cleanly. Verith language had no uncertainty grammar, which meant it had no clean way to ask why someone waited rather than acting. The closest Draw could get was a compound of words that meant roughly for what reason was the readiness kept. Still she sat with it. She typed a translation and stared at it. How long have you been ready? She typed. That was the nearest she could get. She sent it to the session feed flagged as an approximate translation. On the main floor of the chamber, the council chair. Read it aloud. Every delegate looked at the Earth section. Gary Lott, who had been sitting in that section for 9 years, who had attended 411 compact sessions and spoken in approximately 11 of them, looked up at the room. Looking at him, he looked at his hands for a moment. A while he said, "The session did not end well or badly. It ended slowly, the way difficult things end, when no one is ready to close them. There were motions filed. There were committees proposed. There was a formal request for a full capability disclosure from Earth, which Greer accepted without comment, and a secondary motion to review the compact's member registration process so that something like this would be properly classified in the future." Nobody laughed. At the Earth section, that was different. Outside the chamber, in the long white corridor, Gary Lott walked alone toward his shuttle and thought about the 9 years he had sat in the back row and the 411 sessions, and the particular quality of not being seen. He had spent a long time being very good at it. He was not sure yet how he felt about the change. He thought about Owens, somewhere out in the Kith system, in a ship that was already being reclassified by people who were trying to understand what had happened. He thought about the Verith ambassador's question, the version of it that Dar had translated. "How long have you been ready?" He took the shuttle back to his quarters and made himself a cup of coffee and sat with the question for a while, because it was a good question and it deserved more than a corridor answer. The honest answer was 11 years, but that wasn't quite right either, because the ship had been an idea before it was a ship, and the idea had started earlier than the building, and the building had started because someone had been paying attention to a room they sat in the back of and counting things that nobody else thought to count. The honest answer was somewhere between 11 years and a very long time. He drank his coffee and did not try to make it simpler than it was. 3 weeks after the KTH corridor, the ironclad docked at Earth's L2 station. It came in slow, the way big ships come in when they are not in a hurry, and the docking crew watched it from the bay windows with the focused attention of people who have heard a lot about a thing and are now seeing it for the first time. It did not look like what they expected. It looked the same as it had always looked, gray, uneven, patched in places longer than it seemed at a distance. It looked like a prototype, an old one. The docking arms locked, the pressure seals connected. The ironclad sat against the station and breathed, or did the mechanical equivalent of breathing, the subtle sounds of a ship settling, systems powering down from active status, heat venting along the hull in long, slow pulses. Owens was the last one off. He always was. He had a habit of walking the ship before he left it, not in any formal way, not with a checklist, just walking down the main corridor, through the engine deck, past the weapons housing, back up through the crew quarters. It took about 20 minutes. If he went slowly, he always went slowly. He walked it now. The ship was quiet in the way it had been quiet for 11 years before the KTH corridor, but it was a different quiet. Not waiting, something more like Resting, he put one hand on the wall, near the full drive housing, and held it. There for a moment, the metal was warm. From use, he took his hand away and finished his walk. Calvin Pewitt had 6 separate requests waiting for him by the time he reached his quarters. They were from engineering teams representing the Porothy Union, the Marin Sovereignty, 2 divisions of the Thal Confederation, and an independent research body connected to the compact's technical office. All of them, in their own language and their own phrasing, were asking the same thing. They wanted to talk to him about the fold drive, how he had built the precision calibration core, what materials, what tolerances, what theoretical framework he had used. When the existing framework said it wasn't possible, he read through all 6 requests. He made himself a coffee. He sat down. Then he wrote 6 polite replies that all said the same thing in slightly different words, which was that he appreciated their interest and was not available to consult at this time. He was not being secretive. He was being honest. He was not available. He had a list of things on the ironclad that he wanted to look at now that the ship had actually been used under real conditions rather than simulated ones. And that list was going to take him 2 weeks minimum, possibly 3. The full drive calibration had held perfectly, but he wanted to pull the housing and inspect the core directly, because that was what you did after something worked, and you needed to know exactly why it worked so you could make sure it kept working. He finished his coffee and went back to the ship. He was still there when everyone else had gone home. Nora Vance's promotion came through on a Tuesday. She was sitting in the station's small mess hall eating something that was slightly better than the ironclad's reconstituted supplies, but only slightly. When the notification came through on her comm unit, she read it. She set the comm down. She picked up her fork and continued eating. Lieutenant Commander, effective immediately. Pending formal ceremony. She had known it was coming. She had known the moment the engagement ended when she started thinking about the paperwork that would follow and who would end up doing it. The answer was going to be her. It was always going to be her. She was not unhappy about it. She was not exactly happy about it either. It was the kind of thing that was simply true, a fact that arrived and settled into place. Without asking how she felt, she was good at what she did. She had always been good at what she did. The promotion was the official version of something that had already been real for 3 years. She finished her meal, cleaned up, and went to find Owens to ask him what the ceremony was going to involve and whether she could make it shorter. Dara Simmons received the first message from the Varith linguist 8 days after they docked. It came through a private channel, not diplomatic, not official, just a personal communication request from a designate she did not recognize. At first, she almost archived it without opening it. Then she looked at the language code in the header and stopped. Varith. She opened it. The message was short. It introduced the sender as a language specialist within the Dominion. Civil structure, not military, not political. It said the sender had been given Dar's communication address through a channel the sender did not specify. It said the sender had questions if she was willing. Dara read it 3 times. She sat with it for a full day before she wrote back. She said she was willing. The questions came in the next message, and they were not what she expected. She had been ready for political questions or perhaps questions about the ship's capabilities or even questions about Earth's military structure, the Verith linguist asked. None of those things he asked about. Waiting, specifically, he asked about the human concept of waiting as a strategy, not waiting as endurance, not waiting as patience in the simple sense, but waiting as an active choice made by a species that understood how other species would read their stillness. He asked whether this was a common human behavior or specific to the individuals involved in the KTH engagement. Dara thought about this for a long time. She thought about Owens walking to his shuttle from the compact chamber for words already sent across the system. She thought about Pewett's 4 years of engineering and the card on his desk. She thought about the crew eating the same bad food for years, running the same simulations, not going anywhere. She thought about Gary Lott sitting in the back row of the chamber for 9 years and speaking in 11 sessions. She typed her answer slowly because she wanted it to be accurate. It is not strategy exactly. She wrote, it is something we do when we are not seen. We build, we learn, we wait for the moment when what we have built becomes necessary. We do not announce it because announcing it would change how we are treated, and being underestimated is sometimes more useful than being feared. She paused. You asked why we kept our readiness. Still, the answer is that we knew you would only count what you could see. She sent it. Owens found Admiral Greer on the observation deck. It was late by station time. The lights in the corridor had dimmed to their night setting, and most of the station's crew were in quarters. Greer was standing at the viewport looking at nothing in particular, which meant he was looking at something very specific that wasn't outside the window. Owen stood beside him. They were quiet for a while. This was not unusual. They had known each other for long enough that quiet was its own kind of conversation. The compact wants a full disclosure by end of month, Greer said eventually. I know, Owen said. They're going to reclassify everything, the ironclad, probably a few other things they weren't looking at closely, probably. Owens agreed. Greer turned his coffee cup in his hands. You know what that means? Changes the position, Owens said. Being seen changes what you can do. Different problem from here. Greer nodded. He looked out at the viewport. On the other side of the glass, the dark held its usual shape, stars, distance, the particular silence of space that never quite felt like emptiness if you'd spent enough time in it. So Greer said, what do you want to do next? Owens looked at the viewport for a moment. He finished his coffee. Same thing we always do, he said. Build something nobody's looking at. Greer was quiet. Then a small sound came out of him that might have been a laugh. Outside the viewport, on the far side of the docking bay, past the area where the ironclad was resting its wormhole against the station's arms, there was a maintenance bay. The compact's observer registry had it listed as empty. It had been listed as empty for about 4 years. The registry was not correct. Inside the bay, something large and dark sat in the kind of stillness that is not emptiness. It had no running lights. Its hull absorbed the ambient glow from the station and gave nothing back. It was not finished yet. It might be finished in another 3 years, or it might be finished sooner, depending on how many people were watching. Nobody was watching. That was the point. That had always been the point.